Good evening, good evening, good evening. Thank you very much for your company as ever. Lots of love to each and every one of you. Now, my friends, I do have to say from the off a big apology because the Substack, as far as I'm concerned, hasn't been active anywhere near enough. But I have been busy on the campaign trail. And do you know what? It's been one of the most rewarding things that I've ever done. I can say that with my hand on my heart. I really can. Meeting the members of the community that are crying out for reform, quite literally. Members of the activist base who are out there posting leaflets. Even people, seeing my face in people's windows. It's a very weird feeling. But it's one I'm very, very grateful for and incredibly touched and flattered by the generosity and gratitude that's been shown since I joined this campaign a little after leaving GB News. I wasn't expecting to do this. I obviously couldn't have done it at the time I was at GB News because of Ofcom and regulatory restrictions. So it's all been quite nice, to be honest. I mean, it still breaks my heart every single time I get a message saying, I miss you so much on the Saturday 5. Like, I honestly, I miss it too. I do. I really miss the fun and the banter that we put on for you and try to actually give you a break from the severity and basically the depressed narratives that are put out every single day from the news cycle to actually make you laugh. I think that's missing, and I like to make people laugh as much as I possibly can. But on a totally not funny note, on a very glorious note, it is, of course, St. George's Day. So I have draped myself in the flag of St. George. And, of course, this is our national flag. I've already had Emily Thornberry at the door asking me to take off this horrible, horrible racist rag, she called it. I couldn't quite believe it. But, look, happy St. George's Day, first of all, to each and every one of you. Unless, of course, you are, as I mentioned there, part of the professional offence-taking class who actually think that the cross of St. George is somehow a symbol of hate. I mean, tonight, I want us to do, my friends, what the elites want, which is to celebrate England. England, what a marvellous gift to the world England has been. I think it was King Ethelstan, who actually managed to unify England first of all. And since he did that, what a history. What a history of kings and queens and laws and Magna Cartas. What a rich inheritance we have on this little rock of ours. But before I get on to a little bit more about why I think actually St. George's Day ought to be a national holiday, coming up, by the way, I want to talk about migrant crime cover-ups. As a judge who I've got in my sights. Whilst I've been in the ECHR, which, as you know, is my second job, I've clocked a certain British judge who I think actually is proving that the problem is homegrown. You can't just blame the ECHR. Labour's solar panel shame as well, right? They've actually apparently had to make an embarrassing U-turn on slave-built solar panels. The gender madness, we've had a victory in Scotland with lavatories, and that barrister, that's going to really get you, I was going to swear there, really get your goat, shall we say. And all of that, to round us off, I want to talk about this Andrew Tate hysteria. EastEnders now are doing programmes on incels, which is involuntary celibacy, and the movement that is apparently enveloping young men. And I'm quite sick, to be frank, of white working class boys being painted as the devil. I am so sick of it. Honestly, one minute they're privileged, the next they're inherently evil. And then all of a sudden, they're Andrew Tate acolytes who are going to go off and knife little girls. It is just, I find the whole thing a sick, twisted absurdity. But for now, smash that like button, share the stream, drop your thoughts in the comments, especially if you think England deserves a proper bloody bank holiday, like so many other parts of the, well, that's the constituency parts of the United Kingdom. Right, so, as you may well be aware, Scotland, well, up there, they have St Andrew's Day, right? They celebrate St Andrew's Day. They get it off as a national holiday. Wales observe the holiday of St David, and, well, Northern Ireland, yeah, you know, St Patrick's Day, not quite, but not for certain communities in Northern Ireland, but you get me drift. But what have we got here in this country? Well, we've got Labour politicians telling us that we're xenophobic, swivel-eyed racists if we dare fly and support a flag such as our national flag. We get a diversity push. We get told that it's not inclusive enough. And I just have to say, very, very calmly and quietly, but severely, that enough is enough. This is England, right? It's time we had a national day that isn't steeped in either guilt or grovelling. Scotland, as I say, St Andrew, Wales, St David, Northern Ireland, St Patrick. England, we get a shrug and a diversity workshop. Enough is enough. This is England. And it's time we had a national day that actually celebrates all that is great and glorious about Englishness. I don't picture some dull sort of diversity charter cooked up by a quango in Whitehall when I think of Englishness. I think of roast dinners. I think of Shakespeare. I think of Elgar. I think of a pint in a pub that's certainly older than me, but possibly even older than the country that is trying to cancel all of us for daring to be proud of such things as Englishness. And I think of all of the wonderful things that have made this country great. You know, I'm in a part of the world that gave the world the Industrial Revolution. And actually, I've just said great, so I assume I'm going to be sued on it by the lefty progressives. In modern Britain, though, I'm afraid to say English pride is treated like it's sodden asbestos, right? Like it's dangerous, like it's shameful, like it's something to be removed, like a cancer, as quickly as possible. Why is it then that every other part of the UK gets to celebrate their heritage without being called a bigot? You know, the Welsh can bang their drums. They certainly bang their drums in Northern Ireland. The Scots can paint their faces like Braveheart. The Irish, you know, sipping on a Guinness like you wouldn't believe. But when it's St George's Day, we're told it's racist to even fly the flag. You know, as a kid, I was in a Scouts group. And going out for St George, that was a marvellous day. What a brilliant day. And I think probably that instilled in me a sense of gratitude for being English, gratitude for nationhood, and gratitude for my constituent part of the United Kingdom. But this issue isn't about inclusivity. That's what they say. You can't fly the flag because we need to be inclusive. Actually, it's entirely about exclusivity. It's about excluding the English from their country, from their nationhood. They've airbrushed us out of our own national story. And the only time we're allowed to speak up is when we're being told to apologise for having the audacity to build one of the, if not the, most influential civilizations in human history. We're at the bottom of the pecking order in our own home. We've got no devolved parliament. We've got no public holiday. We've got no cultural recognition. You may remember that the BBC's The Proms singing about the likes of, Britain never shall be slaves. Never, never, never shall be slaves. Rule Britannia, of course, being cancelled more times than certain iterations of the Sugar Babes. We just get lectures from the BBC, from The Guardian, telling us that we're imaginary or worse, oppressive. And yet, despite those smears, my friends, despite the erasure, despite the slurs, despite the Emily Thornberrys of the world, thrown at absolutely anybody, by the way, if you say, I'm proud to be English. A quiet defiance, I think, is building. I'm seeing it more and more. I'm hearing it more and more. Young people, working class families especially, are saying enough. So my question to you is, should England finally get its own bank holiday? Should we stop apologising for our existence and history and start celebrating it instead? Let me know in the comment section, because I tell you, if they're going to play the identity politics game, we need to play to win. And not just win, take back the bloody pitch with our Union Jack, I nearly said there, with our flag of St. George, waving it high, waving it loud, waving it proud. This is England, right? You can't say we're some nebulous concept. It's a people, a place, a past, and I hope a future. So happy St. George's Day. And I tell you, if St. George can save me from another unconscious bias workshop for the rest of my days, I'll be very grateful. If I see any more pronouns on dating profiles, I think I'll sodden well scream. Excuse me for coughing. Right. Grumpy Grandad says we should be proud to be English. Damn right. Anna says we are English and proud. Sarah posts the flag of St. George. Eloise says happy St. George's Day. Sarah says I'm proud to be English and biologically female, and that makes me a woman and English. Well said. Yes, and Sarah points out that it's only okay to fly the English flag, of course, when England are playing, right? That seems to be the only culturally acceptable time that you're allowed to do it. Dina says, totally agree with you about celebrating England. It's so sad the left, as well as apathy, has captured the masses. Fly that flag high. Absolutely. Happy St. George's Day to you. Right. Okay. Well, we've got some viewers joining in right now. I think I want to get on to talking to you about... well, there's that marvellous sight, by the way. Look at that. How could you not be proud of that? Look at that. Look at all that flag has managed to do for the world. A gift to the world, a gift to the people of these islands. A total gift. That's all it is. A gift. We should be so proud. And Judith says, let's remember Shakespeare died on St. George's Day. Absolutely. You know, Shakespeare being one of, well, of course, they're trying to decolonize where Shakespeare was born now, of course, as well. So even Shakespeare's open to a cancellation now, too. And, you know, I just despair. I do despair. But we can't allow ourselves to despair exclusively, because that's what they want, right? They want you to be totally down in the dumps, to just be so defeatist that you don't actually fight. And I don't mean literally. I'm not suggesting that you go out and, you know, I don't know, wallop someone, but to just be defiant, be loud and proud, whether that just be on your social media profiles. Just take a stand. Now, I was told by a very close family member of mine that she's refused to put pronouns in her email signature, which they were told to do. And little things like that, you know. I just think it makes people think, oh, maybe I can be brave too. Do you get me? It's not the bravery that those lads in World War II were asked to actually find within themselves, but it's an act of defiance to a culture that's taken over our nation. And I think what's my favourite Shakespeare quote? probably good night, sweet prince, and flights of angels, sing thee to thy rest, which is a bit depressing because it's actually a suicide scene. But I think it's a lovely piece of English literature. I really do. Right, okay, I want to talk to you then about this. Well, Julia says each little act of defiance builds up. Absolutely, Julia, well said. Come on, I've got to talk to you about this woman. Are you ready? It's not going to be nice. It's not going to be pretty. So, this woman is called Rebecca Chapman, and I've called it the Rebecca Chapman scandal. And this isn't satire, right? This is Britain in 2025. Rebecca Chapman moonlights as a judge and an ECHR lawyer, right? And she, you remember all of the agony aunt sketches that I've done for the past, month or so? Maybe longer, probably a couple of months. Well, she has actually been party to many of them, right? Rubber stamping asylum claims and actually making it a side hustle. And I wonder, how the hell can there not possibly be a conflict of interest? You remember the stories about the chicken nuggets? That was oppression, had to stay in England. The sharing of a BBC article in Tehran, well, welcome to Britain. You obviously have to come here because you shared a BBC article. Chicken nuggets are a ticket to Britain's citizenship. A Facebook friend list of a couple of thousand, I think it was. Well, that ought to give you leave to remain. And if you're standing in Rebecca Chapman's courtroom, the answer to those questions seems to always be yes. So I want to dive into that. What I would deem to be one of the most baffling, infuriating, and downright dangerous elements of our so-called justice system. She's a deputy upper tribunal judge, an ECHR barrister, and clearly, in my eyes, in my opinion, an open borders enthusiast. You can throw a dart at the globe and she'd find a reason why it can't possibly be sent back there. If you're a conservative, if you're even a terrorist, if you're a patriarchal, too rural, don't stock chicken McNuggets to your tasting, all reasons to stay in Britain. And Rod Liddell has pointed this out in his column in the Spectator magazine this week, and it caught my eye, so I thank him for writing it. There was one story that he pointed out, which was a story of an Albanian, and we have a real problem with that country when it comes to asylum claims. Now, Albania, Chapman, the judge, paints Albania as some kind of homophobic hellscape, right? That homophobic hellscape decriminalised homosexuality 3 decades ago, and it passed anti-discrimination laws in 2010. But that's not quite enough for Rebecca. You know, apparently a place has to be like the Heaven nightclub in Soho, otherwise you're absolutely unfit for deportation. There was a Nigerian woman failed 8 times and she joined a terrorist group for clout, and she got in on the 9th time of trying because she was in this terrorist group. I'm not joking. A paedophile husband beater stayed because home might be degrading to him. A terrorist was allowed to remain for keeping his house tidy. I've got a list here. Facebook friends, as I say, that's fresh grounds for asylum. And there's a double role at play here. As I said, she's a judge on immigration cases and a barrister representing asylum seekers. How is that not a grotesque conflict of interest? How is that allowed? I don't know what this is, but to me it ain't justice. It's a glorified client referral scheme masquerading as a court for the downtrodden. The ECHR is a massive problem, don't get me wrong. I think we ought to leave it. I think it's a shame that Kemi Badenoch can't commit to doing just that. I think actually that's not only incredibly necessary, but it's a disgrace that we haven't done it already after 14 years of the Conservative Party showing us a bit of leg in suggesting it would do so, even back to David Cameron, wetter than an otter's pocket. The usual Tory line, of course, is that the European Convention is the villain, but they're not willing to do anything about the villain. It's a bit like Scooby-Doo unveiling the masked man, only to not do anything about the masked man once he's been caught and apprehended. And Rod Liddle points out that the ECHR could be a bit of a distraction here, because the problem isn't foreign judges exclusively. It's our own homegrown judges. This is a British rot, not just a Strasbourg rot. So we need to talk not about reform, that we're so past those kinds of things. It's about actually dragging the rotting roots out from the soil and exposing and throwing away the branch. We need to actually sack the people that are appointing these judges. We need to bin the whole rotten tribunal system. Asylum and immigration is a total joke in this country. And totally start again. Root and branch reform. I mean, British justice, we're basically a global Uber Eats, and many of them do come here and do that, by the way, because they can work illegally, for criminals, for chances, for activists in robes, making, I dare say, a lot more than any of us are in this chat tonight. The whole thing is a total absurdity. And I was a bit cheeky with that AI-generated image there. I love open borders, but I tell you what, maybe I would love open borders if I was making a mint out of them. But I tell you who's not making a mint. The women who get abused, the taxpayer that's squeezed to an absolute pulp. The whole system needs to go. You know, I used to think actually we had it good in this country. We weren't like America. We don't make appointments in as far as the judiciary is concerned. But here, to me, it's quite clearly a case where you simply cannot have the kind of activists like we're seeing here being able to make a total mockery out of the system. Because that's what's happening. It is a total farce. Grumpy Grandad says we need a proper leader, I assume, to grab our nation by the scruff of the neck and stop all this nonsense. Layla says correct. Eloise says it's about restoring, not reforming. Absolutely. Eloise also points out that Kemi Badenoch will not be the Conservative leader for long in her eyes. And Julia says the man who attacked his children was allowed to stay for family rights. Yeah, there was an Albanian this week, Julia, who was allowed to stay because his son is in Britain. Well, guess what? The son, he hasn't spoken to the son in goodness only knows how long. He's totally estranged from the son. But he's allowed to use the son as a reason to stay in this country, despite having less to do with him than your wife down the street does. And Julia points out as well, Albania is, of course, looking to accede to the European Union. Very true. And Julia says as well, sorry to I look like I'm favouriting Julia. She's the voice of common sense. Another HR lawyer in this beeping government. It's full of them. Starmer, Blair, my MP. Absolutely, absolutely. We need a leader, not a lawyer. Julia says, if they reserved that or left the ECHR, then these judges would have to follow the national law. A lot of the daft ones would then leave the judiciary. Well, yeah, good point. If actually Parliament as sovereign put its foot down, they would have to get real about it, wouldn't they? Righty-ho. And then staying on that topic of migration, my friends, Rob Jenrick was in the Telegraph today, and he was writing about the fact that the government has conceded, Yvette Cooper as Home Secretary has conceded on a Migrant Crime League table. And Rob's written about why they matter, but how actually we probably know a fair bit about what it's going to tell us anyway. She tried to basically, Yvette Cooper that is, sit on these stats like they were the crown jewels, or maybe the Elgin marbles, and Greece is coming round for tea. But now, well, we've seen data released by politicians who've been clawing at freedom of information requests and all that other stuff. And they do confirm what we suspected, that certain migrant groups are massively overrepresented in crime stats. Now, for saying that, I'm derided as racist. This week, James O'Brien was on LBC, the Lefty Broadcasting Corporation, is that what it is? And he said, why would you need to know this? Why would you need to know this? From his moral high horse, sanctimonious arse. Why would you need to know? Well, I wonder, James, could it be because we've been lied to for years? We've been told that we can't possibly talk about crime and immigration, and integration actually, in the same breath. That it's all just scaremongering tactics from the radical right. That, you're basically a signed-up member of the EDL if you dare suggest that these things could be worthwhile and useful. Well, looking at the receipts, they're damning, right? Because you've got Albania, you've got Afghans, you've got Iraqis, you've got Algerians, you've got Somalis. Top of the crime charts per capita. Now, that league table is one that the Labour Party absolutely didn't want us to ever be able to obtain. But we need it. James O'Brien is, as ever, totally and completely wrong. The data actually shows that 48 nationalities have a higher arrest rate than Brits. A higher 48 nationalities. And if that should tell you actually how much of a complete pot of lava Britain has become in as far as nationalities are concerned, 48 different ones, higher than the British public. That's not just a few bad apples, right? This is a grand orchard that's rotten at the roots. I mentioned that root and branch reform. Take it out, throw it away. Sweden is a good example, and this is what Rob actually tells us within this piece. Sexual assaults by foreign-born men, half of sexual assaults are by foreign-born men. In Denmark, they actually track convictions by country. We should do the same. Japan, Australia, the US, all of them actually talking about doing these kinds of things. Somalia, Morocco, Uganda, these are countries that lead the charts for violent offences. But the Japanese, the Australians, the Americans, well, no, not at all, not at all, not at all, not a problem, not a bother. Is that not information that we need to be aware of? Right? When we're told that actually the people and communities that we need to be helping lead the charts for violent offences. We need to get them out of abject poverty is often what we're told, despite the fact that many people are struggling in this country. But here's the thing. The data wasn't released and won't be released for some time because Yvette Cooper suddenly, managed to find herself a spine. Maybe she could lend it to Sir Keir Starmer. But this wasn't about transparency, this decision. It's actually about damage control. Because as I say, we've got this information. We've had it through those freedom of information requests. We've had it through persistence of pressure groups and public pressure as well. And if we get it by the end of the year, as the Home Office says we do, the full list of the stats up to date and all the rest of it, well, we've got this information now. Why would it take till the end of the year? It's not hard to compile data these days, is it? Artificial intelligence in the age of AI, it ain't hard. So we've had to wrestle with them to do this sort of thing. But what I would say to Rob Jenrick, though, is that it's pretty rich for someone in the Parliamentary Conservative Party to be saying and slagging off the Labour lot for not releasing this data. What did the Conservatives do whilst they were in power? You know, I accept that for years you've had campaigners like Neil O'Brien, for example, who was totally wrong on COVID, by the way, totally nuts on COVID, but right on this, asking the right questions. But I'm not willing to give that party a free pass because Rob Jenrick's written a nice piece. The Conservatives had 14 years in power to actually get a grip of this. They had all the levers of power at their disposal. Majority governments, majority parliaments, I should say. What did they do? Well, they sat on their hands. They spoke about net zero to keep Boris's new marriage happy. We were promised control by them. We were promised truth by them. We were promised action by them. What did we get instead? Well, we got mass migration, we got record crime, we got a political class totally paralysed by fear of being called mean names on X or Twitter. The Tory government didn't act like the Labour government didn't act. They're both, I think, cheeks of an ugly old arse. And the public's had enough of that arse. You know, this isn't academic. It isn't about... I'm not a especially academic person. I don't scroll through stats and receive great amounts of satisfaction from them. But what I do receive satisfaction from is highlighting the lack of safety in our community. It's about our streets, not those sheets, right? It's about our daughters. It's about our future. If Afghans and Eritreans are statistically 20 times more likely to commit sexual offences, then, yeah, it strikes me as pretty obvious that we should be doing deeper checks, stricter visa controls, deporting the lot of those who actually fail those asylum claims, instead of giving them round and round and round to come back again for another bite of the cherry until they get it right that time and we let them in scot-free because some activist judge, some activist lawyer has given them that pass. We're always told, aren't we? We need to do more to protect women and girls. That's what the story was supposedly of in this adolescence Netflix series, which I'll touch on a bit in a moment. But here's a thought for these people, patting themselves on the back. Clever little liberals. How about protecting women and girls from the off? How about protecting them from a reality that needn't be here in the first place? The imported predators that we have allowed to come here, stay here, be fed, watered, bed and board, and all the rest of it here in the first place. Coming to this country, this one here, it ought to be viewed as an immense privilege and, in my opinion, a rarity, not a right. And it certainly shouldn't be extended to those who are statistically more likely to pose a threat to the people already here. And if that upsets gets clipped up by the liberal left, fine, whatever. You know, the truth often does get dragged through the dirt by these people, but I don't care. The Migrant Crime League, and this is where I do agree with Robert Jenrick, the data matters because it's not just data, it's damning. They're a mirror to our society. They show us what our political class has done to us, what they refuse to actually admit, that not all cultures are equally valid. Why is it that Japan, US, Australia don't do these things, commit these crimes? It tells us that mass migration has immense consequence, and that actually, unless we take back control It was a slogan I campaigned on, heart and soul, in that 2016 plebiscite referendum. Take back control. But I don't mean a veneer of control. I mean real control. Because if we don't, we're condemning another generation to actually pay the price of the laissez-faire mistakes that a generation of politicians have inflicted upon the nation, despite us time and again telling them that we wanted the opposite of what they've done to us. So the only question now, I think, now that we can see this, we don't need to wait for Yvette Cooper's release of data. The only question we need to ask ourselves as a country is, will we notice what's happened, what's happening, or will we simply look away, view it as too difficult to deal with? That's my question to them. Julia says, Jenrick will never be able to achieve what he wants to do because the 1922 will stop him. That's the backbenchers of the Conservative Parliamentary Party. If he really wants to do this, he needs to change his bench. Yeah, and good luck with that. Elaine says, Yvette Cooper will be amending all the statistics as we speak. Grumpy Grandad says, I don't trust Labour to give us the true figures. And Christina says, all these immigrants are actually from war-torn countries. I don't think so. Well, no, Christina, as we said earlier, Albania is not a war-torn country. It's not a homophobic country, which was the narrative pushed by the lawyers making vast sums. Judith says, we've been told for years that murders haven't gone up since we did away with hanging, and we have only, I think, 60 on whole life sentences, those whole life tariffs. And this week it's come out that 2 people every week are killed by people with mental health issues. That alone gives us more deaths than when we had hanging, when we had that capital punishment. I'm still of the view, actually, that we do need to actually bring back that for the very worst, completely unable to be questioned cases of the most grotesque murder and abuse. I do. And again, I don't care what anyone thinks about that opinion. Lee Anderson summed it up, says Julia. It costs £50 on an EasyJet to come from Albania, £2,000 to come on a boat. What's the difference? Well, you don't get your passport checked and sent back if you're a criminal. GG says, we need to know exactly what immigration is doing to our nation. Elaine, Labour don't want to secure our borders. They could easily do it if they wanted to. They have a big majority. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and Julia reminds us of that old argument the left used to parrot, where stop and search actually was stopping more black people than white people. And actually, I remember Cressida Dick, she was formerly the head of the Metropolitan Police. I remember her defending that and saying, well, there's a reason for that, right? That's what the stats, the data tells us. And the left wanted to hide that data because it's racist. Well, is it racist if actually it stops black kids being stabbed to death on the streets? They just don't use their noggin. Keith is in Wallsend and he says, this place is always crawling with delivery drivers, mainly congregating around the McDonald's dark kitchen. And most of them are driving knackered cars. The rest are on illegal e-bikes. The lawlessness, Keith, it is terrible. And it's ruining areas like Wallsend, isn't it? Anyway, these are all the subscribers, by the way, in this chat, where if you subscribe to darrengrimes.com for the price of a pint, you can join our chat group where all of these wonderful faces that I'm seeing scrolling through here are part of that chat community. And we keep each other sane, I would like to think. Yeah, Julia points out the Ruda Cabana case is a capital punishment example. Absolutely, he ought to hang. Right, okay, what have I got next for you then? Well, I know what's next. I've got to talk, haven't I? I've got to talk about the week in trans. And I don't mean trans fats. I don't mean transnational. I do, of course, mean transgender. And you know, it makes me laugh when people say to me, trans people just want a voice. Trans people just want to be heard and respected. Are you kidding? We've spent the last, at least 10 years talking about this damn topic. Just want to be heard. They've not shut up. But anyway, as J.K. Rowling once said, this horrible turf, she once said, wear what you want, call yourself what you want. It's a free society. How is that transphobic in a position? But we've just had, because of this Supreme Court ruling, in which the definition of sex was clarified, in Scotland we've had a wonderful piece of news where a school in Scotland are going to be forced to reinstate single-sex toilets. Now, this is quite clearly a knock-on effect of the Supreme Court decision to clarify in law the definition of sex, as I say, and the profound repercussions are already being felt. It's sort of a bit like when President Trump got into power, and the repercussions as far as speech online were obvious to see. Have you been on Facebook recently, by the way? It completely transformed. But that's me going off on a tangent. A good example has to be this one, doesn't it? Where even in Scotland, with the Stasi SNP, in which the trans madness really has been allowed to run riot. I don't know if you remember, but there was the case of Adam Bryson, who went by Isla Bryson. Is it Isla or Isla? In which he was a double rapist in a female prison. And it was one of the stories that was part of Nicola Sturgeon's ultimate downfall. And these parents here on your screen, they fought back against the rainbow cult, and they actually managed to win. And the Scottish courts have ruled in favour of restoring boys' and girls' toilets. If you told me this, maybe even 10 years ago, that I'd be sat here talking to you about the fact that Scottish courts have actually ruled in favour of boys' and girls' toilets existing, I would have told you were totally insane. Not gender-neutral anxiety closets, which I think is what many of the trans activist class think of them as, or whatever, Bridget Phillipson wants to bring about. This has been a rare victory for common sense, and one in which we have to ask ourselves the question, is the tide finally turning? Because there was Labour's Education Secretary and Women and Equalities Minister. She is, for those that don't know, the anti-private school ideologue. She's so class warfare marks and mistress-in-chief, really, of class warfare. And she decided that actually the best way to deal with men entering women's bathrooms is simply to abolish women's bathrooms. Now, I wish I was joking, but that's actually what's been suggested this week alone. Here's the thing. How about we just use the bathrooms assigned to our sex, what we're born as, the bits you've got, and stop entertaining this whole charade? And it's not hard to figure out, actually, why they're in such a mess on this issue and why they've had to reverse ferret Prime Minister's questions was absolutely glorious today for a change. Because let's just remind ourselves of the comments that Starmer has made over recent years, showing his support, effectively, for me as Darren to be able to wake up tomorrow and decide I'm Doreen and walk into a lass's bathroom whenever I feel like it, just because, well, I say it, my way or the highway.
Trans rights are human rights, and I support the right to self-identification, self-identity. The Gender Recognition Act was a step in the right direction, but it doesn't go far enough.
You agree with J.K. Rowling and her position about transgenderism, that there is a creeping sense that the transgender lobby is being so aggressive that is actually beginning to damage women's rights?
Well, what I've said in this, because it is a sensitive issue, trans rights are human rights. The legislation we've got doesn't go far enough. And we ought to have a cross-party consensus about looking at it to see whether it can be developed.
Is it transphobic to say only women have a cervix?
Well, it is
That's what Rosie
something
Duffield
that,
said.
Shouldn't be said. It is not right.
I think that trans women should have access to women-only spaces, such as prisons, for example, or toilets or refuges.
Well, look, trans rights are human rights, and the trans community are amongst the most abused and discriminated of any community, and we need to absolutely understand that and have a grown-up discussion about how we go forward. Violence against women and girls, so I've seen firsthand how important that is. But Vicky, what I wouldn't leave out of account is there is a small percentage, a small group of people who do not identify with the gender that they were born into, and they go through a huge amount of stress. If you talk to some of the parents of teenagers who are confused and concerned and can't get the medical treatment they want, I think that we should be compassionate and we should recognise that we already have a law in place for gender recognition that needs to be modernised. So that campaigning to ensure conversion therapy is banned once and for all. And we're committed to updating the GRA to introduce self-declaration for trans people.
So you see there that he has a long and rich bank of commentary on this particular issue. And the one comment, I want to talk about Rosie Duffield in particular, but the one comment that got me was his comment, his flippant remarks about young people and the way in which actually if Keir Starmer had got his way, that there would have been the mutilation of young people through automatic gender affirmation on an industrial scale, in which kids who may well just be young gay kids struggling with themselves then their bodies going through puberty, autistic kids, there's a bank of data suggesting that actually has a link to early experiences of what is defined as gender dysphoria. But the evidence says these kids grow out of that. These kids come to terms with themselves as God made them, if I can use a bit of Christian theological terminology there. But putting that aside, I just think the flippant way in which he can say that he wanted to actually allow these kids to be mutilated as compassion, that ain't compassion. It's reckless abandon of safeguarding and responsibility of adults to protect children. But this is what happened. This is what we allowed to happen in Britain. And now I go back to that. I wanted to talk about Rosie Duffield, but I had to say that. The most shocking example of human collateral from Labour's trans obsession has, of course, been Rosie Duffield. And I mean it. Political collateral. I don't include in that the scores of children I've just mentioned who mutilated their bodies in the name of gender affirmation. But as far as exclusively politics goes, she actually had to leave her own party, did Rosie Duffield MP, I believe, for Canterbury. Such was, and she actually had to hire security for her own party conference. Such was the venom and vitriol directed her way. We saw it at protests over recent days in which there were placards depicting the hanging of TERFs, which is trans-exclusionary radical feminists, so women, hanging of women being called for on the streets. And I ask you this, a very simple question. How come Sir Keir Starmer didn't give the same response to that kind of blatant calling incitement for violence as he did for those who posted tweets online, the mothers, the care workers who are in prison right now for posting tweets online after the Southport massacre by that horrible scrote whose name I don't want to actually speak out loud again? Is it different if you're a blue-haired they-them that incites violence, Mr. Starmer? Perhaps it is. Perhaps it is.
And to get the clarity.
Trans rights are human rights, and I support.
And to get the clarity, is it right?
He was asked about whether or not he would apologise to Rosie Duffield for what he has actually refused to do, which is defend her as a woman who says only women have a cervix. How revolutionary. What a bigot. But he was asked directly about Rosie on Good Morning Britain and whether or not the Labour Party would offer a full and frank apology.
Is it wrong for Rosie Duffield to say only women have a cervix?
Well, look, biologically, she, of course, is right about that.
So do you owe her an apology?
Well, I don't want this to go back into this toxic place where everybody is divided.
Would you say sorry to Rosie Duffield for the way that she's been treated?
Look, Rosie Duffield and I get on very well. We discuss a number of issues. She's a much respected member of the Parliamentary Labour Party, and I want to have a discussion with her and anybody else about how we go forward in a positive way.
Okay.
Well, she has, of course, since left the Labour Party, so that ain't true. And I wonder, my friends, I wonder if you can have a watch of this next clip and keep your eyes on Rosie Duffield's eye. Someone in the parliamentary TV switchboard, or whatever they call it, the studio, managed to clock Rosie Duffield's expression when Sir Keir Starmer was asked about her and responded. Have a watch.
Mr. Speaker, I've always approached this on the basis that we should treat everyone with dignity and respect, whatever their different views, and I'll continue to do so.
I've got to do that again. Watch.
Mr. Speaker, I've always approached this on the basis that we should treat everyone with dignity and respect, whatever their different views, and I'll continue to do so.
Good for you, Rosie Pett. Good for you. And there she's wearing her dinosaur pin badge. And that's because they were called dinosaurs by, guess who? Guess who? David Lammy. David Lammy called these women dinosaurs for their views on sex and gender. And he, of course, was the Starmer Stormtrooper in chief. And there he is, saying, I've always had respect for other sides of the argument. Have you, hell? You did nothing when one of your own parliamentarians was being abused on a massive scale just for stating biological truth and immutable fact. You are a charlatan, a spineless, cretinous charlatan. So that expression on Rosie Duffield's face was well justified, in my opinion. And he was massacred at Prime Minister's Questions today, and rightly so, on behalf of every single woman and child in this country. And he was given both barrels, finally, by the leader of the opposition, Kemi Badenoch. And you know, I'm not in the Conservative Party, but I'm happy to see it. I'm happy to support her on what she said. It was wonderful.
Speaker, he's clearly so uncomfortable talking about this subject. Yes. This is a choice between a Conservative Party that stood up for common sense and a Labour Party that bent the knee to every passing fad. This is a question about moral courage, Mr. Speaker, about doing the right thing even when it is difficult. And the truth is, he doesn't have the balls. The Prime Minister only tells people what they want to hear. He only tells people what they want to hear. He is a weather vane who twists in the wind. He cheered an ideology that denied safe spaces to women and girls because he thought it was cool to do so. He hounded a brave female MP out of his party for telling the truth he accepts now. And now he is hiding behind the Supreme Court judgment. And isn't that because he doesn't know what he actually believes?
Absolutely, yes. Why does it take a judge to tell you what biological sex is for you to accept that definition? We all have known this. It is, as I said there, a contemptible, cretinous clown. That's what he is. Without a spine. And Kemi Badenoch there says, you haven't got any balls. Well, Yvette Cooper is a Mrs. Balls by marriage. Perhaps he could borrow some from her. Or maybe Lord Ali's given his up on a key ring. Maybe he could have those. Oh, he just makes my skin crawl. An absolute pathetic excuse of a parliamentary prime minister. That's what he is. Makes my skin crawl. But at least finally, maybe, just maybe, we're actually managing to see some rewards in as far as common sense is on this trans issue. I hope so. The Supreme Court have actually done us a real... I haven't said that about the Supreme Court before, but I'm very happy about that decision and what it's actually managed to do. And I'm very grateful to the women and girls who've actually brought these legal challenges in the first place. I believe it was For Women Scotland that brought the legal challenge. So thank you very much to them. Right. What have you had to say about this? Julia says he makes everyone throw up. Grumpy Grandad says my grandkids know what a woman is. Absolutely. Elaine says he said he didn't want to drag it back to the gutter. Can't remember his exact words, but he was the one that put it in the gutter. Absolutely. Hannah says they're reading from scripts. Yeah, well, that's true. Grumpy Grandad, Kemi took Starmer to the cleaners. Good for her. It's about time. Alan says Lammy is lame. He's thicker than two short planks. He should apologise to Rosie. Yeah, he should. He should. Julia says, I think Jacob Rees-Mogg should join Reform. His policies are more suited and aligned to them. That would be great if he did. I don't think it's going to happen. He seems pretty tribal, really, as far as party politics is concerned. Grumpy Grandad says he wouldn't know his backside from his elbow. Absolutely. Julia, if someone calls me a cisgendered woman, apparently, I shall give them a biff. A right biff. Tina says, I'm sick of hearing about how we should respect trans rights. When these people post videos mocking us and even threaten us with violence, why the hell should we respect them? They don't respect anyone else. And then Grumpy Grandad, I'm sick of the trans issue. Men should stay out of women's sport and spaces. End of. As if we need a judge to tell us what a woman is. It shows how bonkers it all is. And it shows how totally morally bankrupt and politically inept Keir Starmer is as well, Grumpy Grandad. It just exposes the man entirely. And I hope the British public can see that. I really hope they can. You know, we've got elections next week. Let's hope, actually, women go to the ballot box especially. Layla says, Jacob Rees-Mogg is a good person. Yes, I'm not saying he's not a good person. I'm just saying that he's very tribal to his party, the Conservative Party. That's not a criticism. It's I guess to a lot of people, it would be quite laudable. And I can see Victoria and Michael on YouTube commenting along as well. Get yourself over to Substack as well. You can join us there and have a good chinwag with the rest of us. They called us an elite group on Substack. An elite group. Give over. There's now elite about me. Right. Oh, come on. I've got to, come on. I've done Starmer. I've got to talk about Red Ed. I've got to. I'm sorry. Get your sick bag ready. I've got to do it. I've got to do it. So, Labour's climate saint, Ed Miliband, who is, the puppet for the puppeteer of all climate change, which is, of course, Greta Thunberg, who he met with and basically sat there and like she was a young deity in some kind of forgotten regime that used to think children were God or the sun or whatever else. And he's been caught out again. And this time it's over the use of those Chinese slave labour to actually build, especially the Uyghur Muslims who are in concentration camps in China, to build solar panels that he wants installed across the country and, of course, the countryside. And that's why, in my view, they are going after farmers so heavily through their inheritance tax regime. And it ain't net zero. I'll tell you what it is. It's net exploitation. And we need to name and shame this grift. That's what it is. And it ain't going to make us any richer. It ain't going to make us any happier, healthier, warmer in our homes. If anything, it's going to do the opposite. So I just couldn't believe the madness of it until I saw this, which is experiments are going to begin in Britain to dim the sun. They've been given the green light by the UK government. And I'm just sort of like, how much money is this going to cost us? Dim the sun. I don't know about you, but I'm crying out for the sun most days. Dim the sun. At least I don't have to turn on my heating. At least a pensioner in a home doesn't have to turn on the heating after he's just scrapped their winter fuel allowance. Dim the sun. Who do these people think they are? God. It's insanity. Their priorities, honestly, these people are totally, totally nuts. It's net zero. They're talking about saving the steelworks, the British steelworks. How can you possibly do that when we have the highest energy costs for energy-intensive industry? Not in Europe, but in the entire world. We are a world leader in making ourselves cold, in making ourselves poor. And everybody from Ed Miliband to Sir Keir Starmer to His Majesty the King are all proponents of this totally mental madness. I make no apology for saying loud and proud that I am totally opposed to net zero. I think human flourishing is entirely dependent on cheap, reliable sources of abundant energy. And this achieves the opposite of that. And as Julia says, so we have ULEZ, which is in London, to lower toxic gases, and they're going to throw chemicals into the air to blot out the sun. Make it make sense. Pamela says, Red Ed is dangerous. I agree. He's the most dangerous man in Britain. I mean, it beggars belief for me, like that the fact that they genuinely think that, and actually on YouTube, someone's got a really funny comment. Dazzles, how will their solar panels work if they put out the sun? Absolutely right. Absolutely. And they think they can block out the sun. They can't even stop people coming over in little inflatable dinghies. Never mind stopping the sun. You couldn't make it up. Couldn't make it up. Right, the last topic that I wanted to talk to you about then was, Michael points out, I'm in Scotland. We get about a week of sun a year, and they're going to even block out that, I know. God bless you. Right. This is the topic. So, Andrew Tate incels and a complete media and political meltdown over these so-called pressing issues. You know, Andrew Tate can breathe. I don't particularly like the man myself, to be honest. He's not my cup of tea. But he breathes, and the Fleet Street Fairies and the Westminster Wasters, they faint. The latest round of incel panic has been on an episode of EastEnders. I haven't watched EastEnders since I was a kid, but I saw this headline and I thought, oh my word, how many kids are still watching EastEnders? And there are headlines screeching about radicalisation, as you can see here from the Metro newspaper. And if you can call it that these days. And it's all over podcast clips from a bloke with a microphone. And I think actually this movement isn't about women's safety. It's about the left's inability to actually tolerate compliant men who get on board with saying that you need to be less masculine, you need to be a good little boy that, you know, stays, does whatever. I find the movement that we've seen basically since World War II to tell men that being masculine is a bad thing, is inherently bad. And I'm so sick. I think of my two brothers. I've got two younger brothers, both of them white. It'll shock you to learn. Both of them told that they are inherently privileged. In and out of factory work is one of them. Precarious work that it is. And because of the inordinate cost of energy in this country, exorbitant cost, I should say. And we're told that because of the colour of his skin, that my brother is inherently privileged. His grandfather was a miner, his dad was an alcoholic, and you're telling me that because he's white, he's privileged, he's more privileged than a black middle-class family in this country. And now we're telling kids that they are growing to grow up to be women abusers, that men are just an inherent evil, and that we need to do something about this through Netflix documentaries, through episodes of EastEnders, through slagging off Andrew Tate at every given opportunity. And Jordan Peterson had this to say on it, and I thought it was well worth listening to on Sir Keir Starmer's response to this. Of course, Keir Starmer can't get it right either, because he keeps saying that this was a Netflix documentary. He said it multiple times. It wasn't a documentary, it was a damn drama series, and it wasn't even based on two white people. It was the actual story is, reports suggest, linked to a black guy that murdered a woman. So why is it the vilification of the white kids is okay? They have it pretty damn bloody hard. And there he is. That's Andrew Tate, of course, being the devil in question. For those that don't know, he is apparently raising a generation of the radical right that want to go out and kill women.
And Starmer's posturing with regards to adolescence is only going to make that worse. It's bad psychology, and it's not only that, it's also oriented not to help young people, but to make Mr. Starmer feel a hell of a lot more secure in the idiot presumptions of his dimwit progressivism. So, and that's really the fundamental aim. It's like, how can we show we're right? And if we have to burn some young people on the pyre to make sure that our moral presuppositions can remain intact and our faith in our idiocy remains unchallenged, then we might as well teach kids using a Netflix series on adolescence. Jesus, brutal, pathetic, to the core. This terrible moral posturing. You know, that's, I think, the most pathological element of our age. You know, how can we garner as much undeserved moral credit as we possibly can? Well, we'll stand up against.
I agree with him. I agree with him with every fibre of my being. my heart breaks actually for a lot of those kids growing up today. What life chances do they have? Think about this. What prospects do they have in the job market? They're not great. What prospects do they have, especially when they're hiking national insurance, for example? Employers aren't going to want to take on the hit. And their prospects in a country that has allowed boat after boat of mass migration to lower their likelihood of being able to compete on a decent wage. They can't get a house. They can't call something their own. The price of absolutely everything is going up and up and up. Their lives are made harder and harder and harder. And instead, what we want to do to these people is tell them that they have a innate hatred in them because of the fact that they are white boys. I agree. Pathological is a good word. Is there anything more pathological than that? So that progressives can feel good about themselves and pretend they care about women and girls. You care about women and girls. You've just tried to allow a slew of men to be able to identify and gain access into those bathrooms. You care about women and girls. You just scrapped an inquiry into rape gangs to actually get to the root cause and the underlying fact that we have in this country people who are still getting away with the systemic rape of white working class girls because of their skin colour by primarily Pakistani men. You scrapped an inquiry into that. You allowed men into women's bathrooms. And you turn round to us and tell us that you're on the side of women and girls coming after white men as the unique problem and evil in the world? How dare you? They make me sick. Totally sick. So I couldn't agree with Jordan Peterson more. I really couldn't. Right, my friends. Let's see what you've said there. Grumpy Grandad says, well said, Darren, thank you. Neil says, how have we got a Prime Minister who gets everything wrong? I'm not used to agreeing with everything governments have done, but this is lunacy. I agree, Neil. This is definitely the worst government of my lifetime, but I'm hearing from much older people than me that it's the worst government of theirs too. Oh, Elaine says she had internet connection issues. It should be fine. It seems, I think it's been all right for other people. But let me know if it hasn't, though, and I'll see what I can do to address it later on. I am going to get off now, but thank you to everyone who joined on YouTube, on TikTok, and crucially, as Victoria, I think it was, said, this elite cabal we have on Substack. It's not an elite cabal, I promise. We all chat to each other every single day. And it's a way in which we can be part of a community on there, safe from cancellation and censorship. And I love it dearly. And I love talking to you all there. So if you're not there already, you can get a free subscription too. It's www.darrengrimes.com. If you support my work, this has been Grimes Unleashed tonight from England's unapologetic corner of the internet. And if you enjoyed this show, please do share it, comment below, hit the subscribe button. All of it helps. Support freedom of expression, support a broadcaster who's willing to say it how it is, and someone who doesn't actually need a BBC fact checker to have a thought or a sodding judge to tell me what a woman is. But I'll see yous next time. And remember, my friends, remember this, crucially, England is a project well worth celebrating, well worth defending. Good night.